Welcome to the Just My MomSense podcast. I'm not an expert. I'm just trying to figure out parenting and in turn myself while sharing things I've learned with all of you. Hello! First, I want to say thank you so much to all those that have listened to the pilot and first episode of the podcast. I dropped it on Mother's Day. Figured that could be an appropriate time. And also had a little nudge from a friend to do that, which was a great idea. But I am so excited for today's episode because I have my very first guest. It's so exciting. And this guest is someone I have known for over 5 years, thanks to the Disney community. And she is someone with an extensive background in education, along with being a mom and grandmother. So it's so great to have my friend, Dr. Val, on the podcast today. And we're going to be talking about how we all learn, how kids learn, how adults learn, what kind of process our brains go through in order to receive information. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Val. Welcome, Val, to the Just My MomSense podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Thank you for being here. Disclaimer to everyone listening, we've already been talking for 15 minutes and about a million other things. So, now it's like, oh, I guess we should start recording and do something.
Yeah.
So I think this episode, we are going to focus on how kids learn, how people learn, learning styles. I've also seen some, as I was doing like a little bit of research. If anyone knows me, I save things at the last minute and I don't do too much. But I do see some arguments against the idea of learning styles. So we can talk about that too.
Yeah.
But first, you do 100,000 things. And so if you could tell us all your background in education, get the scroll ready. We can hear all of the things that you have done in your career.
Yes. And you're welcome to edit out any of the things that you want to, because as I was telling Jen earlier, when you hit my age, the scroll gets longer and longer and longer. But actually, my background is in education. I have a degree from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, go Vols, in elementary education. Nice. And so I started off as a classroom teacher and taught basically over the years. It was typically third, fourth. I taught fifth grade and sixth grade each 1 year. This was back when that was still in elementary school.
Right.
And but third and fourth grade were typically the years that I taught the most when I was a classroom teacher. And I was pretty early in my classroom teaching that I had a principal that came to me and said that they really thought that I should look into going into administration. And so I started looking at doing my master's in administration and supervision and started working on that. And so I became the director of curriculum and instruction for a school where I had the opportunity to work with teachers and help them in the classroom and to develop curriculum and all of those kinds of things. And I really loved doing that. That was really I love teaching teachers. That's my thing. So I love to do that.
I saw your face change when you talked about it.
Yeah.
You got instantly a little giddy.
That was the dream. That was what I loved doing. And but over the course of the next several years, I did eventually become principal for the school. And I loved being principal. I loved working with the kids. I loved working with the parents and being able to work with the teachers. It's just a different way of working. And so I think my heart always leaned back towards the position that I had as director of curriculum instruction was really more my what I loved doing more. Yeah. And so decided to work on my doctorate in education with the thought that maybe someday I could teach at a university, teach teachers. That is really kind of what my heart was. And so I finished up and received my doctorate. Then it was pandemic, and then it was some family things that happened. And so I had resigned my position. We lived in Franklin, Tennessee. So I resigned my position there and we came home to Cleveland, Tennessee to help take care of family. And so my mom will be 94 in June.
Mhm.
And so basically, I have really just been focusing on helping take care of family. My brother was very sick. He passed away last year. And so that just sort of became my focus.
Yeah.
And I have the opportunity to do some conferencing for teachers. And I have the opportunity to work with a friend of mine on a podcast that we do to help volunteer teachers.
Mhm.
And because we have a lot of churches in the country that have teachers and children's ministers that don't have an education background.
Mhm.
So we are using our education background to help train volunteers that work with kids in classroom settings. And so that is sort of my story in a
Yes.
nutshell. Very, a lot of years, very quickly, as quickly as I can do it.
A condensed version.
Yes.
I should say that how I know you is I did a shameless plug in the pilot of this whole thing that I do have another podcast that is based on
Yes.
our love of Disney. And I met you through that community because we
Wonderful.
share a love of Disney. So I have
Mm-hmm.
known you at this point for, I mean, in person for probably five
Yeah.
years or so, but maybe a little bit
Oh.
more than that. And I know that like moving back home was such like a hard decision. And also
Yeah.
you are like one of the sweetest and most caring people I
Oh,
know. So
thank
I
you.
know that it was also really good for you to be close to home and close to
Yeah.
your family and having that time. And I know you've been through so many ups and downs over the last few years, but like
Mhm.
you and your husband are always amazing me with everything you guys do and how much you take care of your family. And so I love your story and your background.
Oh, thank you so much. Oh, yeah, the community that we found through you and Frank
Yeah.
and just our friends, our Disney friends, as we tell
Yeah.
people, have been such a huge blessing in our lives. I think that this transition, because like I said, we sort of started, really met you at the time when we had just moved, and
Yeah.
like I said, the pandemic and everything was going on,
Yeah.
and so I feel like I've often told people that you guys have been instrumental in helping me with this transition, because it was finding this community that was so much fun and so encouraging, and just being able to have friends that not only that you can talk Disney with, but also you guys have been there for us so many times as we've gone through the difficult things these last few years. So it's just been amazing how we have found this community of friends that have meant so much and really helped with this transition, because it has been really hard.
Yeah.
I have my heart was in education, and my heart was in doing the work.
Mhm.
And so for me to step back from that has been a challenge.
Yeah.
So anytime that I have the chance to talk about these things, I get very excited, because it's like I said, I don't get to do it as much as I used to, and I do miss it a lot.
Yeah, but you find different ways to still incorporate it, which is great. And you have your podcast, and I know you do some writing as well. You do still do
Mhm.
curriculum writing?
I do some curriculum writing, and we're working on. Actually, I'm starting work on a book
Mm.
about literacy in children, and so that's a big step for me. But
Mhm.
I've backed a little bit off some of the curriculum writing to kind of start focusing on trying to put out a book. My dissertation was my professor from my the lead professor um, from when I received my doctorate has been pushing me to write a book with my dissertation for a while. And with everything that was happening, I just couldn't. And so,
Yeah,
I'm trying to spend a little bit more time writing in that way. So it's a
that's
little
good.
intimidating, but it's fun.
Yeah. I remember talking about that in September with you and like it's so exciting that you're going down that path even if are going down it slowly and
Yeah,
taking your
very
time and
slowly.
that's fine. That's fine. You'll get there.
Hopefully, eventually, yes.
Yeah. Did you have when you were teaching, did you have a favorite grade to teach?
I loved third grade. I
Yeah.
think I taught fourth grade probably longer than any of the other grades, but I loved the kids when they are, because third grade is such a hard year
Yeah.
and it's a big transition,
Mhm.
and they're coming into their own a little bit more. They're getting a little bit more independent. They're starting to understand sarcasm, which is a lot of
Mhm.
fun, you
Yeah.
know, but they are still very childlike in
Yeah.
the way that they interact with you. And so I always thought that was just a lot of fun. But I just enjoyed that content. I enjoyed helping them. Um, One of the things that I always love to do, because typically if a child has any kind of challenges
Mhm.
in their education, it kind of pops up in third grade. And so because of just the difference in the material and the intensity and everything that they're trying to learn. And so I had a heart for working with kids that were really struggling
Yeah.
academically in a classroom setting.
Mhm.
And so I just loved that opportunity to kind of help them come into their own as
Yeah.
they were beginning to understand, oh wow, this is harder now. This is a
Yeah.
lot of work. This is a lot of stuff. And so
Yeah.
I also had one of the things that I think that this is why, one of the reasons why my principal had come to me and said, I think you need to look at administration, is because, this was back in the 90s where
Mhm.
one, testing and things for kids was very limited. And so
Yeah.
there wasn't a lot that was being done.
Yep.
And also, it was still in that transition period of education in the way that teachers looked at their classrooms. And so I would often, I'd take my kids, for PE, and when I would come back to the classroom, I would see kids sitting out in the hallway on the,
Mhm. Yeah.
and, talking with their teachers. It was just that sense of they just couldn't deal anymore. And so they just
Yes.
sent them to sit out. And I couldn't stand that sight.
Yeah.
It just drove me nuts.
Yeah.
And so I literally I would set up extra desks in my classroom.
Mhm.
And so I talked to all of like the other third grade teachers that were around me and said, if you have kids that you want to send out in the hall because you just can't,
Yeah.
can you just send them to my classroom?
Yeah.
you
Oh.
know and
Yeah.
so I had a little desk for them to sit at, and
Yeah.
so and I would try to help them to be able to accomplish, because the teacher would always give them work to do to sit out in the hallway, but they would never be doing it because
Yeah.
and I felt like it was just such a lost opportunity to make a connection
Mhm.
with a kid and to be able to help them. And so I loved having them in my classroom, and so I would, work with them when I could, in between, doing things for my own class. But
Yeah.
it was just that sense of finding unique ways to help kids learn better
Mhm.
was just so much fun for me. I
Yeah.
enjoyed that. So yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, and think about how many kids have that memory of you that,
Mm.
you could have changed their whole day, you could have changed their whole year because of that. Because it's true that in the 90s, there was not as much of an awareness of how kids are learning or how they're able to sit in a classroom. And I think, I see my kids are in second and fifth grade right now. And so
Mhm.
I see differences that they have throughout their day that I didn't have all of that when I was growing up, and how
Yeah.
many times they're up and moving during the day, or how many times they put them
Oh,
in
yeah.
little groups for different things, or they have, what do they call them? Not, they don't call them stations, but it's something like that where they kind of hop
Right.
around from different activities sometimes just to
Right.
get them learning with different materials or moving their
Mhm.
bodies in different ways or taking those breaks throughout the day. And
Right.
how much of a difference just that makes, just getting up and
Oh,
moving makes, where I feel
oh,
like
yeah.
we sat, we went to lunch and recess, and that was it. You just
Right.
sit and learn, and that's it.
Mhm.
And then when you go home, like, here's the homework, and here, like, what are we
Mhm.
doing? And it
Mhm.
seemed very just that, like, here's what you have to do. Just do it this way,
Mhm.
and don't ask any questions,
Right.
and don't do it
Oh, yeah.
differently, and don't, this is how
Right.
it's done. You have to deal with it.
Right.
And
Right.
it's nice to see that things are a little different now.
Well, and that I think is one of the things that I worked so hard to help my teachers understand when I was helping them in their development, is that we have this mindset that education is a group of children sitting at desks
Mhm.
quietly
Yeah.
listening to lecture, and then, doing the assignments, and that it's the child's responsibility fully
Yeah,
to engage in their learning.
exactly.
And so one of the things that I really tried to explain is that it's the teacher's responsibility not just to communicate well to your
Yeah,
students, but also to entertain them enough to want to learn and
yeah,
to engage them in the material that they're learning.
yeah,
And so it's not this authoritarian. I've never believed that it's this authoritarian. The teacher comes in, you listen to what kind of thing. It's. I think that it's one of the reasons why um, learning styles has always been so intriguing to me, is because it's the idea of engaging your students where they are. I would hear teachers complain a lot about kids. They would name the child and say, this child is ruining my classroom. He's making this, whatever they are wanting to vent with. And for some reason, my brain was just wired differently.
mm-hmm.
When I had a challenging kid in my classroom,
Yeah,
my brain went to how can I be a better teacher
yeah,
to be able to engage that child?
yeah,
Not that I still didn't have expectations. And obviously, I know that teachers have a ton of things that they're expected to accomplish in a school year, ridiculous amount of things that they're
yes,
expected to accomplish in a school year. And so they do have to have structure, and they do have to have times where they are listening to lecture and times where,
yeah,
but the idea is that if I have a child that's not connecting, then it's my responsibility as the educator to find how can I engage the student in a different way.
mm-hmm.
And my granddaughter was talking, we were at dinner the other day, and she was saying that she had to retake a biology test on Monday because the entire class failed the biology test.
Mm-hmm.
And her teacher pretty much, just blessed them out for failing it
Right.
and said, you have to study harder and come back, and we're going to take it again on Monday. Not realizing that if the entire class
Yeah,
failed the
yeah,
test, then there was a problem with the instruction in
for
some
sure.
way.
Yeah,
And so just telling them to study harder and come back on Monday is not going to help them be
right.
able to understand the material any better.
Yeah,
It's the teacher putting all of the responsibility on the kids. And I think that when you look at that, because I told her, I said, if that had been one of my teachers and I had had that come across my desk, that the entire class had failed, I would be going back to saying, how are you going to teach this differently? What are you going to be doing? Not, oh, they just need to
exactly.
retake the test again.
Right. And not only
So,
that, like, so go study. We're not going to really say what you were struggling with or not.
mm-hmm.
So figure that out on your own over a
Right.
weekend and then come back on a Monday and take it
Mm-hmm.
again, knowing that you all fail. Like all of
Right.
that is
Right.
just
It's just
what?
like, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
no,
no, no.
no. But I do think, and that's similar to parents too, where there are times I think over I have now been a parent for a decade that I feel like a lot of the learning for me came in what am I doing and how am I reacting? How am
Mm-hmm.
I treating this situation? What words am I using? And it for me, I always feel like I come back to me in those
Mm-hmm.
moments, even though they're super stressful. And not to say that I haven't had my moments of, "Ah!"
Oh, no, we all do.
Yeah.
That's
But
normal.
ultimately, I'm like, yeah, no, I can't. I just can't say it that way, or I can't
Mm-hmm.
react this way, or because I went here, they went here, or whatever it
Mm-hmm.
was
Yeah.
that, and you see the difference. You see the difference when you meet them where they are. And I
Yes.
think that's the same in schools. You
Mm-hmm.
kind of have to meet them where they are. And to your point, if an entire class has failed,
Mm-hmm.
that is something that you need to go, hold on. What are
Right.
they missing? What are there similar questions they were all missing or all getting
Right.
right? Of like, okay, they
Right.
got this down, but this thing over here was harder for them and
Mm-hmm.
figuring out a new way to approach that.
Right.
Yeah.
Which I understand. It's
Yeah.
teachers have a lot on their plate.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
to sometimes when I would say things, they would say, well, you don't understand what I do understand.
Yeah.
But I also understand the basics of how we learn, the basics of how kids can understand and process. Those things haven't changed.
Hmm.
We have to look at how we can better accommodate their needs so that they can learn these things.
Yes.
Because ultimately, you cannot force it. It's not forcible. It can't be done in that way. And so, I mean, over time, we learn how to learn in different ways.
Yeah.
Over time, after being in school for 12 years,
Mm-hmm.
you learn how to sit at a desk and
Yes.
take notes,
Yep.
but that's not necessarily the best way for you to learn. And
Exactly.
so that's what I think that teachers sometimes forget in the the pressure of everything else that is expected of them and everything else that's going on.
Yeah.
It's hard to be able to do, because when you're talking about the difference between if you're just working with your child at home
Hmm.
compared to working with
Oh my God.
25,
Yes.
30 kids in a classroom,
Yes.
there is a big difference there. But I think that it's these little things that we can do that can help children to be able to process and understand better. And
Yeah.
so it's finding those things.
Yeah. I mean, for me, um, not being a teacher, not coming from that place. So, but I appreciate teachers so much. And I
Mhm.
feel like our school district, we have been so lucky with the teachers my kids have had. And my son was in kindergarten when the pandemic started, so
Oh,
his kindergarten year was kind of cut short, and then the following
yeah.
year we were given the option of fully virtual or hybrid. And
Hmm.
ultimately we made the decision for fully virtual for the consistency of it because we
Hmm.
knew both things would be hard for him,
Right.
but the consistency at least would be the same.
Yeah.
And his teacher who did virtual was we were like amazed by her every day because she has a screen full of what 20 something first graders, and she
Hmm.
had Google Classroom set up, and she had all these, she was able to do breakout rooms and kind of put them into groups sometimes so they can kind of just chat and show their toys to each other here and
Right.
there,
Right.
but also like bring them back and have the activities. And sometimes we'd go to the schools to pick up, a packet of stuff
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
they could do a craft for, they might have worksheets, but we were amazed by what she was
Hmm.
able to do in such a weird, strange time and
Right.
environment.
Right.
And to be able to hold the focus for the most part of a bunch of first graders was like amazing to us. So we always think about that. But, I feel for teachers because I know that they have this schedule they have to meet. And especially as the
Right.
kids get older with like state tests and everything like that, it's like, well, you got to do
Hmm.
this. And because they have to be ready for the state test and they have to,
Right.
it is so much on their plate that
Oh,
I can't I can't even imagine how you organize all of
yeah.
that.
Hmm.
And to your point on something like this, it's hard to then take those steps back because to
Right.
spend more time means you have to play catch up somewhere else. And it's
Right.
like it's a hard system to see that, I feel like almost everyone gets set up for failure a little bit,
Hmm.
because
Oh, yeah.
how are the teachers expected to do everything they need to do, and how are the kids expected to meet everything they need to meet?
Oh,
It's tough. It's so
it's,
hard.
I don't know how teachers
Yeah.
do it now, looking at what they're expected to do now.
Yeah.
Because for us, when I was still in the classroom, our standardized testing was important,
Hmm.
but the standardized testing was for us to be able to determine how effective our curriculum was
Yeah.
in teaching children. That was the way we looked at our standardized testing. We didn't have the pressure
Yeah.
of now it's used to determine whether or not kids, some school systems use it to decide whether kids are going to be able to promote to the next grade. Now
Yeah.
they're using it to look at the effectiveness of the classroom.
Mhm.
And so it's just a different type of pressure, and it's just a different type of world. And then
Yeah.
you add on to that, like you said, just the number of responsibilities that they have, and the number of languages now that they're
Yeah.
working with in a
Mhm.
classroom. It's just, to me, I have such respect for teachers in the classroom today because it's
Yes.
vastly different
Yeah.
than when I was teaching. Yeah.
Yeah. And so fast paced and so,
Hmm.
just get this done, meet these goals,
Right.
and just kind of pushing everything along sometimes.
Mhm.
And every once in a while I do see where there's wiggle room where teachers will take a step back or
Yeah,
but yeah, it's so
yeah,
tough to see.
it is.
And to the top main topic of the podcast, because we could probably just go on like this for a
Oh,
while.
oh yeah,
Um,
yeah.
you also have a full classroom of kids who
Mhm.
all learn differently.
Right.
And, I've already seen that just with my two kids. They both learn to read completely different. My son could
Hmm.
say the letters in a word and be like, oh, Range, orange, got it, it's locked in. And that would like
Yeah.
he never sounded out words. He could
Hmm.
kind of more memorize them as it went on, which
Right.
was also like,
Right.
but do you know how what you're
Yeah. Like,
saying, what you're seeing? Where my
yeah.
daughter had to sound it all out and like get to that, like say it slow, say it a little faster, and work on it a little more. And that's just reading. And so you
Yeah.
take a classroom full of kids where they all work differently and learn differently. How do you even how do you approach something like that? Can you talk to the different styles there are of learning,
I
and
can.
how you approach that in a classroom?
Yes. It is a challenge.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that I think is so great when parents are willing to learn a little bit about this, because I think this is something too that parents can utilize at home
Yeah.
to help their kids learn, because it can't always be used in the same way in a classroom setting
Right.
because it is a little overwhelming. But for those of you who are not familiar, learning styles is an educational theory that was created by a man by the name of Dr. Howard Gardner a very long time ago. Won't age myself, but I first read his book on multiple intelligences when I was working on my undergraduate at UT. And so I was fascinated by it because I was fascinated by the idea, because I love to learn. I am a student at heart. I want to learn everything anytime, but I have always struggled in school for a lot of different reasons, but just, I just have never been that student that could sit and memorize things and learn things the way that everybody else kind of seemed to.
Hmm.
And so I really resonated a lot when I read about multiple intelligences. And basically, his theory was that everything worth learning can be taught in different ways,
Yeah.
and that everyone has a basic learning style that they are just born with. It's
Hmm.
who you are, it's how your brain works, it's
Yeah.
the way, it's just your natural way of understanding things better. I think that a lot of times where the problem comes in, and I'll kind of go through the learning styles here in just
Yeah.
a second, but I think one of the difficulties that people have with it is because they assume that you're saying this is the one and only way that somebody can learn.
Hmm.
And that's not what Dr. Gardner intended, and that's not the way that it's really laid out.
Yeah.
The idea is that you just have a strength, a way that you tend to learn better. And like I mentioned before, we can be taught to learn a different way. You learn as you get older how to sit and listen to lectures, because as you get into high school and college,
Hmm.
lectures and
Yeah.
and notes and all of those things, that's just the way you learn in every class pretty much. And
Yeah.
so we do eventually learn how to process that way, but we each still have these innate ways that our brain just functions. It's just the way they work.
Yeah.
And it's really fascinating when you start, or I think it is, when you start looking at these different ways. And Howard Gardner actually identified 8 learning styles to begin with. They've been added to, they've been taken away from, they've been, but I tend to, as I'm working with teachers, as I'm working with training, I tend to stick just to these 8 basic, just to kind of help people understand, learning styles and how it can affect what a kid can comprehend and how they can learn. And so, if it's good with you, I'll just go through the 8.
Yeah,
You can just
go for it.
stop me and,
No, you're
and
fine.
ask questions in between.
Yeah.
Um, I'm going to start off with my learning style is
Hmm.
visual.
Yeah.
Visual learners need to see something to be able to understand something. If I have a piece of furniture from IKEA, I can't just look at the book and follow the steps. I
Yeah.
first have to see what the finished product is going to look like
Hmm.
before my brain can process each step.
Yeah.
So I also, for me, my brain works in a way where I have little movies that play in my mind all the
Mhm.
time.
Yeah.
And because I see the world visually. So, like, if I'm trying to find my keys, I'm
Hmm.
going to think in my head, okay, I came in the door, I walked to this room.
Yeah.
Like, I kind of play it like a little movie in my head because I need to see it to be able to understand it.
Oh, I do that too.
Yes, yes, it's like that. So it's like that's just the way I function. Yeah.
Yeah.
The next one that is kinesthetic,
Hmm.
and kinesthetic learners learn through movements.
Okay.
These are the kids that just can't sit still, and it's
Yeah.
not that they're trying to be difficult. It's just that their bodies are wired that way.
Yeah.
They need to move to learn. The cool thing about it is that we actually have a chemical in our brain that is released during motion that helps with retention.
Hmm.
So we all learn better and remember things better when we're moving.
Yeah.
But
Makes
the
sense.
kinesthetic learners are the ones that just have to be moving in some way.
Yeah.
There are auditory learners, which learn through music.
Mm.
Now, we all kind of do this. I don't
Yeah.
know if somebody asked me what the preamble to the Constitution is, I can say it cold. We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility. If you think I memorized that in seventh grade by memorizing it, you're very wrong. It is because of Schoolhouse Rock.
Hmm.
It was a song, and I don't even know how many people still are familiar
Yeah.
with Schoolhouse Rock. But for me, it was an every Saturday, kind
Yeah.
of thing. They ran between the cartoons when I was a kid.
Yep.
And, you don't learn those words just by, happenstance. It was just
Yes.
that song gets in my head and I can remember it and I can still sing it and I can, anyway. um, Auditory learners learn by beat and rhythm.
Hmm.
If you have kids that like to have music played
Yeah.
while they're doing their homework and you're always like, that's just going to distract you,
Hmm.
there are some kids that actually can focus on their homework better when there's music playing because the rhythm and the beat helps their processing. So
Yeah.
those are auditory learners. These are the ones that can listen to a book on tape
Hmm.
and really focus and learn on what, because they're hearing the words instead of reading the words.
Yeah. I will say that I did
Um,
play some Schoolhouse Rock recently for
yes.
my son because he was having a test on the branches of government and all the things. I'm like, hold on, we're talking about bills being vetoed. Hold on,
Yeah,
I got a song for you.
I'm
Like,
just a Bill. You
brought
got
up the video on YouTube. He's like, what? When is this from? What is this? I'm like, it's
This is how
awesome.
we learned in the olden days. No.
Hmm. And
Schoolhouse Rock was very, very important. Like it very much was the foundation of a lot of things I
yeah,
learned when I was a kid.
for
Not
sure.
that and see, the thing is this too, I'm not musically inclined.
Hmm.
I took 10 years of piano and I can play one song if you ask me to. I am not a musical person. I cannot sing
Yeah,
worth anything,
yeah,
but music does help my brain process better. It
yeah,
helps me learn things better. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
That's so
So
funny.
I'm so glad he got to see
Yeah,
Schoolhouse Rock. I love Schoolhouse. That's
I
that's
know.
why
And
I
then I
said I
used,
know that most people don't even know it anymore.
yeah, and then I was asking because they set up the three branches as a three-ring circus. So I was like, what's the third ring of the circus? Like,
See,
as
that's
we're walking to
perfect.
school that day.
That is you helping him be able to process a concept in a different way than his teacher in his classroom probably can.
Right. Yep.
So
Hmm.
see, that's yay. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that. I love it. The next is verbal. These kids are kids that learn better through talking and through listening to people communicate. So they do actually learn pretty well during lecture because they do understand things verbally better. But
Yeah.
they're also the kids that they have to say things out loud to really be able to process it.
Hmm.
So they need that time to be able to talk it through with
Yeah.
somebody because just talking about it is going to help them to be able to understand it better.
Yeah.
On the opposite end of the verbal learners are the reflective learners.
Mm.
And these are learners that have to sit and think about it.
Hmm.
They don't want the outside discussion. The
Yeah.
worst thing a teacher can do is to put a reflective learner next to a verbal learner in a classroom. And we
Hmm.
tend to do that as
Yeah.
teachers because you think, oh, well, Tommy's very quiet.
Yeah.
Sally is very chatty. Tommy is going to help Sally be less talkative.
No.
No, Sally is going to drive Tommy crazy
Yeah.
because reflective learners can't handle all of that verbal
Right.
interaction. They
Mm-hmm.
need time to be able to sit through and process and to maybe write it out as
Yeah.
opposed to speaking it out. So
Right.
they're going to struggle, with each other that way.
Mm-hmm.
Logical learners are like my husband's. They're very mathematical. They're
Mm-hmm.
very logical in the way that they think.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier that if I lose my keys, I'm playing that little movie in my head. If he loses his keys and he asks me for help, the first thing I say was, well, when is the last time you remember having them? And for him, that's not logical. If I knew
Right.
where I had them last, then I would know where to find them. I don't understand why you're asking me this. And so he has that very logical, mindset. These kids do well in math and science because
Mm-hmm.
they do understand, things in a very logical, very
Yeah.
precise way. And so they need
Mm-hmm.
to understand the why behind
Yeah.
things. How does this work? Why does this work this way? They to be able to process well.
Right.
So relational learners are learners that really need another person to be able to understand things, and they need to have a relationship with you to be able to understand things. If they're going to learn from you, they need to trust you and they need to know that you're trustworthy. And
Mm-hmm.
so their thing is all about the relationship. How do I connect with you to be able to understand and learn? And so they do need other people, where you have those reflective learners that need quiet time. They need to sit
Mm-hmm.
quietly by themselves. Relational learners are going to enjoy the verbal learners more because they're going to be
Right.
able to have that, relationship with somebody to be able to talk and to learn.
Right.
And then
Makes
I
sense.
think the last one is natural learners. Natural learners are learners that enjoy being outside.
Mm-hmm.
They actually, I mean, if you just take the classroom out to the, playground and have the
Yeah.
lesson there, that's their favorite thing in the world because they just need to be with nature. If you
Mm-hmm.
can connect lessons to nature,
Yeah.
to animals, to plants, to those kinds of things, that's really going to be what sparks their excitement and what they're going to get really excited about. And
Right.
so they are considered natural learners because they need nature to be able to connect.
Yeah.
So again, those are like the basic 8 learning styles that Gardner originally, wrote about.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if you listen, like I just gave a very short like explanation for each one, I know, but you have probably already said, oh yeah, I really like this better. I learn
Mm-hmm.
this way better, or I enjoy doing this better, or I like,
Right.
you know, for me, like I mentioned before, music is not my strong suit. So I am not super comfortable with music. I am not a nature girl by
Yeah.
heart. Like I
Yeah.
don't love, you know, to be out with the plants and the flowers and the trees.
Yeah.
Um, but as the teacher being responsible for trying to engage my students, I need to bring all of these different styles into my classroom
Yeah.
so that my kids can process and learn better. It really gives you opportunities to find more creative ways to
Mm-hmm.
teach your lessons because you are thinking through, you know, my kids respond well to these types of activities.
Right.
It's just making education more active based. It's active learning as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to passive, where you're just sitting there taking notes and having to
Right.
study from a book.
So, how do you, as a teacher, how are
Mhm.
you able to identify and see or realize how
Mhm.
different kids are learning and be able to seat them appropriately in the classroom or know when maybe you need some outside time
Yeah.
or how easy is that for a teacher? How quickly can
Oh,
that happen? Yeah.
it's incredibly hard
Yeah.
because it's a lot of trial and error,
Yeah.
and it's a lot about. And this is the thing that I think I talk about a lot with teachers is that relationships are important in
Hmm.
education. You have to get to know your kids
Yeah.
so that you can make connections, because just like kids that learn through relationships, we all do that in some way, where
Yeah.
we connect better with people when they know us and they
Yeah.
understand us. And so that means you have to spend time talking to kids, you have to spend time getting to know them a little bit, finding out what they're interested in. And that was one of the things. If I had a challenging student in my classroom that I was really having a hard time and again, like I said, was typically third grade. So you're looking at those years, especially in the 90s where kids had not been tested yet.
Yeah.
So we did not have the ability to understand exactly what their learning challenges might have been.
Yeah.
So the very first thing that I really tried to do was just to get to know my kids. What do
Hmm.
you like? What do you enjoy doing? Just having those conversations. What did you do last night? Tell me, have them describe their rooms to you from their
Yeah.
house. Like, what kinds of toys do you have? What kinds of things do you like to do? And as you get to know kids, you begin to see the ways that they prefer because they're going to naturally gravitate. Like I said, for kids, you learn how to learn, but it takes time. When you have a
Yeah.
kindergartner in a classroom, they've never been in a classroom setting probably before, so they don't understand how to sit at
Right.
a desk and to learn. But so many times teachers still believe that's the way you have to train them to learn. If you
Yes.
just let the kids kind of like, if you just give them opportunities to just gravitate to things, you're going
Yeah.
to find the things that they really love.
Yeah.
If you have a classroom set up with centers that have art
Centers. That's
projects,
the word I wanted before, not the stations.
I love centers. I
Yeah.
am a big centers person, and I
Yes.
know that that's not the way that the world looks at education anymore, and it just kills me. And so I'm so excited that your
Yeah. I
classrooms
was
there
like,
have
that's not the
centers.
word, but it's a thing. I
Yes.
don't Centers.
Because if you have these centers where you have like a quiet area set up in your classroom where that maybe has, some bean bags and a bookshelf,
Yeah.
and then you have maybe an art center that has some paper and drawing, materials and things. And then maybe you have a center where you have um, an audio thing set up with headphones where kids can sit. You can begin to see where they kind of gravitate to during time that they have that's free,
Yeah.
because you're not going to gravitate to an area that you don't feel comfortable in. I mean, like I said, everybody wants to do, like, I can learn through music. It's just
Hmm.
not my preferred way to learn. It's not the way my brain
Right.
thinks. But I am going to go to that art center. I'm
Yeah.
going to go to that, but my visual is going to be very stimulated by, other activities.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm going to lean to. And so you begin to know your kids that way. It's really funny because we think that, again, teachers have teachers have this need to have authority in a classroom.
Hmm.
But honestly, if you have a relationship with your kids, like if you get to know them, if they see that you care about them,
Yeah.
then they are going to respond to you in a very different way. That doesn't mean every day is going to be perfect. That doesn't mean that
Right.
you don't have to follow rules and
Hmm.
and give structure. But if they know that you care about the little things,
Yeah.
um, I had a student. It's one of those things where still to this day, I wish I could know where he is today and
Oh,
and
yeah.
and how things worked for him. He was just really struggling, and he was one of those kids that would throw books and knock
Hmm.
down chairs because he would just get so frustrated.
Yeah.
And again, it was taking a long time to try to get any testing done to kind of see how we could help him. And so my brain was, how do we get through a school day? Like,
Yeah.
how can we help him get through the school day? Because I had 24 other kids in the classroom.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I started talking to him about was just, so what'd you do last night? Like, I would just have him come sit at my desk when the kids are working on something, and I would say, and he played video games. And I was raised in the 80s. I'm a huge video game fan, and I was familiar with the video game that he was talking about. And
Hmm.
when I mentioned that to him, the look on his face of, you play that video game? And
A grown-up
it,
knows this?
yeah, he was just sort of like, what? And it just took that to give me an in, where then it was like,
Yeah.
I can talk to her about this. And so we started making little deals about when we could talk about video games, and like when,
Yeah.
how much work he would have to try to get done before
Hmm.
and it was just an opportunity that I had to make a connection with him. And he did
Yeah.
end up he was tested. He did he was transferred to a special school.
Hmm.
Because he did have some needs that I couldn't, in a,
Yeah.
in a, in a classroom setting, couldn't take care of.
Hmm.
So that's why I said I would love, that's one of those things that I would love to know whatever happened and how he
Yeah.
did, because he was a precious kid, but he just had a lot of things he was struggling with.
Yeah.
But it was making that connection and finding out, okay, he loves games.
Yeah.
So that gave me an in for how I could try to present things to him or give him work that he could
Right.
do, because I knew that that was going to engage him and it was going to excite him. And so it helped us get through the time until we were able to get him the help that he needed.
Yeah.
But so many times we don't even try to do that with kids in our classroom because there's just so many of them and we just don't have the time. But that's something that parents have a unique opportunity though to do, because you do know your kid and you do know what they love. And
Yeah.
so if you can find ways to incorporate those things that they love into the work that they're required to do for school, that's
Yeah.
just going to help engage their brain more. It's going to help
Mhm.
them to be able to learn and understand things better.
I love that. What I have also seen some talk of recently is the idea of making, from a parent standpoint, making accommodations for your kids. And
Mm-hmm.
this argument of, well, if you're just making accommodations for them, you're just teaching them that this is okay, or you're teaching them that they're not going to have to deal with things in the real world. And I disagree with that, because
Mm-hmm.
I feel like if you're making accommodations or if you are letting them breathe sometimes if they're feeling overwhelmed or whatever it is, instead
Mm-hmm.
of being like, no, you have to do this and or you have to clean your room and
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is. If you step back and you're able to make these connections similar to you with like, we could talk about video games or making these deals of once we get our work done, we can do this.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it's creating more of like a safe environment
Right.
and trust and all the things and more communication. What do you say to the argument of, well, if you make these accommodations, these kids aren't going to know how it is in the real world?
I get that from teachers all the
Yeah.
time. And I understand the thought process behind them. And
Mhm.
I do believe in structure. I
Yeah.
do believe in
Yes.
schedule. I do
Yes.
believe in kids understanding that sometimes things are appropriate and sometimes things are not.
Yes.
Because you do have to teach them that. That's not
For
something they
sure.
learn naturally.
Yeah. Agreed.
But I think sometimes we go to extremes
Mhm.
when we have these feelings of like, well, this kid just needs to do what I tell them to do, or
Yeah.
they have to do it in this way. They don't. You know, I'd have teachers a lot of times say in fifth grade, well, I have to get these kids ready for high school. No, you have to get them through fifth grade.
Yep.
It's helpful if they can begin to understand what's going to happen in high school,
Right.
but it's not high school yet.
Exactly.
And so like I'm sitting here with like a stress ball at my
Uh-huh.
desk because I get yeah.
Uh-huh.
And so like for me with kids in the classroom back then, they didn't have a lot of these,
Yep.
but I had silly putty.
Yep.
And so I would often have kids that would come to my desk and get silly putty and go back and sit down. And I'd have teachers say, well, if that child does it, every child will want to do it.
Mhm.
Some of them will,
Yep.
some of them won't care. Some
Yep.
of them will do it once and then never do it again. But
Exactly.
this particular child needs it on a regular basis.
Hmm.
And so it is not going to cause me, like, I have not made noise as I've sat
Yeah.
here and done this. You know, I am not drawing attention to myself.
Right.
I mean, kids need to know that I can't hurl it across the classroom or hit another
Of
kid with
course.
it. But if you
Yeah.
need it as you sit and work or as you take a test, then how is
Yep.
that harming anyone? And
Exactly.
yes, they'll understand that, I know because now I understand they can't have anything on their desk during standardized testing. So
Hmm.
they do need to know there are going to be some times where you can't have this,
Yeah.
but how is it harming anything for me to let them have it
Hmm.
to help them to be able to process and learn and get to that point? The other thing is that kids are incredibly understanding if you give them the chance to be.
Yeah.
Yes, you might have a child or two that would say, well, why does Tommy get to go sit, in that chair?
Yeah.
But quite honestly, they start realizing that Tommy is a lot easier in the classroom if he
Yeah.
is sitting in that chair. So
Yes.
they're okay with him sitting in that chair.
Hmm.
It's they really do begin to understand.
Yeah.
Tommy just needs to sit there for a minute. He'll be fine.
Yeah.
And it's no big deal. And most kids begin to go, yeah, I can really tell, because if Tommy doesn't get to do these things, then yes, Tommy can be more disruptive. I mean, they're
Yeah.
not saying that, but their
Sure.
brains are processing it.
Hmm.
So one of the things I've always said to teachers, is that we have to look at our kids more individually and what they need,
Yeah.
and help them be able to process those needs in the world that we live in. That doesn't mean they can never do this. It just means that we need to help them understand when they can, and maybe when times aren't appropriate for it.
Yep.
But if it's going to help them be able to process and learn better, then how can we not have these accommodations that are not disruptive accommodations,
Right.
that are, things that we can do in the classroom to help them to be able to learn better. And I think it's the same with parents.
Hmm.
Um, I think if you know your kids and you know what they need. And so I think that, like maybe you can't have them take an iPad with them into the theater,
Yeah.
you know, but if you are going to do something else that day that is going to be stressful for them, and the iPad's not going to be disruptive, then why not let them have it this time and help them
Right.
understand and help them find other ways to cope that they can take with them places,
Yeah.
so that they can understand the structure of just the world that we live in. Because
Hmm.
we don't want them to feel, because that is the thing that I worry the most about, because there are times when you have to help kids understand that life is difficult and sometimes we have to push through.
Yeah.
But I had lots of conversations with parents, helping them understand when those times are,
Hmm. Yeah.
and when we're doing too much for our kids
Yeah.
so that they aren't able to function.
Right.
There's there's a balance
Balance,
there,
about.
if that
Yep.
makes sense.
That's
Um,
the word I was going to use, is balance. It's all a balance. And it's all
all
a
about
tricky
balance.
balance. And it is those trial and error moments and
It
trying
is.
to figure out what works best. And sometimes it is too much, and sometimes you got to go the other way.
Right.
But it's all
And
balance.
we're all going to make mistakes, and we're all going to
Yeah.
find that, okay, this just did not work.
Yeah.
As kids get older, they're able to process and understand better. We can't expect a kindergartner or a first grader just to be able to understand, well, this is the way the world works, you're going to have to deal with it. Their
Right.
brains have not developed enough to be
Exactly.
able to process that information.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, some kids are quicker than others to be able to pick up on things, but
Yeah.
typically at that age, they need more guidance. They need, people to help them to be able to understand. But I mean, just think about, I mean, I can think about times during the day when I just need a little extra help. Some days are worse than others, and some days I need quiet, or some days I need, that stress ball, or some days I
Yeah.
need, and why do I expect anything differently from my kids? It's
Exactly.
just part of who we are as human beings.
Yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
Even something like rest, like sometimes they just need to veg out, and we need to
Mhm.
veg out. And
Yeah.
I think about that sometimes if they like rewatch a movie or show where I'm like, let's watch something different. You guys have seen this already. I'm like, who am I kidding? I watch Gilmore Girls 100 times. Like, what am I, what do
Yes,
you
it's
mean?
that
What am
comfort.
I
It's
trying
those
to do?
comfort things of knowing
Yeah,
how things end. It's that it's,
it is.
the repetition is important. And it's really
Yes.
funny. They can handle so much more than we think. I can remember my very first student teaching. I have never been a cool person. I'm not a cool person,
What?
but
I beg
I
to differ.
no, very nerdy. But I can remember like walking into that classroom for the very first time. It was a sixth grade classroom, and I remember thinking, I am a college student. They are going to think I'm awesome. They're going to, like
Yeah.
I'm going to just be buddies with them. They're going to love me. They're going to do everything I say. And I walked into this classroom, and my very first day, two kids got into a fight. Like, I mean, like a full on, they were punching each
Oh
other,
my
had to
God.
separate them, the whole 9 yards.
Hmm.
And the rule for the school at that point was that if you got into a fight, if you touched another child,
Yeah.
you immediately went to the principal's office. The principal handled the punishment.
Yeah.
And so, I had to separate them, I had to calm everybody down. I had to send them. And I can remember sitting, I mean, it's funny how we remember things. I can remember
Yeah.
sitting at that desk thinking in my head, okay, the kid's going to hate me. That kid is never going to, he's never going to forget, he's just, and, he walked back in the classroom, and he walked up to my desk, and his face was down, and he said, Mrs. Davidson, I'm very sorry for causing a problem in your classroom
Oh,
today. And after that, he was just the most perfect student. I mean,
yeah.
just anything I needed to do. And it was that first lesson of me understanding that kids need structure,
Yeah.
they need to understand that their actions have consequences
Yeah.
and take responsibility.
Hmm.
But also, I was able just to, I mean, I was able to get to know that kid more. I was
Yeah.
able to have a lot of fun in the classroom. We were able to do a lot of things that semester, and it ended up being a really great experience.
Yeah.
But kids need structure, they need guidance, they need all of those things, but they also need us to occasionally go, you know what, I just understand when it's a bad day.
Yeah.
I get bad days too, and so
Yeah.
maybe today we just don't do this today. Maybe today we sit and we watch a movie for the 100th time,
Right.
because they just need that time.
Hmm.
And so that doesn't mean there's anything bad or wrong, it's just we're human.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a huge testament to you because how much easier would it have
Mhm.
been to be like, oh, this kid, well, he's just going to be a problem all year. Oh, well, and just write him off and just
Yeah.
that's
Hmm.
it. And like, and I say easy with some quotes around it because it's not. And
It's
it's,
not.
you're missing out on so much. And so
Hmm.
to be able to have that empathy and understanding and make that
Hmm.
connection changes the whole rest
Hmm.
of the year for you
It
and him.
does. It does.
Yeah.
It really does.
Yeah.
And I think that comes to with parents, for parents getting to know your kid,
Mhm.
having fun with your kid,
Yeah.
knowing that sometimes it's okay if they don't always do things 100% the
Yeah.
perfect way.
Yes.
And being okay with that. If they do, fail a test, if they
Hmm.
do, not get their homework in on time, if they do something, just to be able to say, you know what, that you'll have to deal with the consequences from that,
Yeah.
but also not just pile on, because there's a billion different reasons why, kids will sometimes have a bad day. And
Yeah.
so it's just not feeling like you have to be drill sergeant
Yeah.
24 hours a day.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's so, especially during the school year, I always catch myself every couple of months or weeks where you get into the routine of everything. Oh, we have to go to school. We have to do this. We have to do this. There's this activity there. And you're kind of just on autopilot doing all the things.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, I will hit this point of, I feel like we just need some time. We just need
Mm-hmm.
time together, or we just need, because it's so easy to get caught up in everything you have to do instead of just having some fun and relaxing a
Mm-hmm.
little bit and enjoying
Yeah.
each other.
Yeah.
And I know there are so many kids in so many activities, and it makes it difficult. And not that you're not enjoying time, you're just kind of doing it in a different way. But those
Yeah.
one-on-one moments, I feel like do so much for the kid, even if they're
Mm-hmm.
happening only once in a while because of
Oh,
how
yeah.
crazy schedules are, or both parents are working, or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you take, a couple of hours or a day or even 1 hour, whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is, sometimes that can just make such a difference for them.
Oh, it's huge. And when you find those things, and like I said, the thing with learning styles, not to put more on parents, because I know that parents already have a bazillion things to do. But if you can figure out the ways that your kids learn more effectively,
Hmm.
you can find ways to bring these activities into what you're doing with them. So
Yeah.
they're getting that outlet through you.
Yeah.
It's just like what you were talking about with your son in Schoolhouse Rock. And when you
Hmm.
knew that he was studying about the legislator, you brought in a fun way
Yeah.
to be able to process that material.
Hmm.
And there are a billion things about learning styles on the internet.
Yeah.
So if you find, okay, I really think that my kid is a reflective learner, like I think that they just need that time, then you can look that up and find activities
Hmm.
that maybe you can just have ready,
Yeah.
so that you can help them, when they're struggling with some schoolwork or something, you can help guide them into the activities and the games and the things that they need to do, so that activates that part of their brain,
Yeah.
so that they can more fully understand the concepts that they're trying to learn.
Yeah.
And not that you have to do that with absolutely everything, but if
Hmm.
you have a time when you know your kid's struggling with something,
Yes.
that's when you can kind of bring these other activities in. And again, not that any of the activities, this is one of the things that I tell teachers, we tend to teach our learning style more than we teach any of the others.
Hmm.
And so it really takes a lot for me to remind myself, I have to bring in the natural, I have to bring in the music and the
Yeah.
kinesthetic, because I always called myself bummer teacher because I loved, I like the structure things a little bit
Yeah.
different in my own mind.
Hmm.
But I have to remind myself that again, I am held to the responsibility of communicating, entertaining, and engaging so
Yes.
that the child can learn better. And so that means that sometimes I have to go outside my comfort zone.
Yeah.
It also means for any teachers that are listening that lesson plans cannot just go from year to year and be exactly the same,
Right.
because the classroom that you had last year is going to be completely different than the classroom you have this year. And I always had
Yeah.
teachers that would, because they had to turn their lesson plans into me each week, and they would give me a hard time because they were like, "You actually read those?" I'm like, "I actually read those, and I know that this is the same thing that you did last year."
Yeah.
And so, I need you to think: is that going to be the best way for this group of kids to learn that
Right.
concept? So things have to be adjusted and changed, because you might have kids in your classroom that no one learns well with
Hmm.
music. And so that means that you don't have to do music as often,
Yeah.
but you incorporate the other things because that's just the group of kids you have.
Yeah. I mentioned earlier that I had seen some arguments against learning styles.
Yes.
One being, it's not a real thing. That's not a thing. And obviously it was a video, and so I
Uh-huh.
tend to click comments when I shouldn't because they just bother me. But I clicked on the
Yes.
comments, and there were teachers in there saying, "Oh, I go crazy when my administration mentions learning styles, and it's so ridiculous. And this idea that everyone's brain works differently is crazy." Anyway, let me
No,
remove my
no.
opinion from it as you ask me the question. But I I did see someone else comment of like it's not about it's so black and white, that there's a
Right.
preference in how we learn, and that it
Yeah.
doesn't mean we're not going to learn 2 plus 2 by writing it down. It's
Yeah.
just our preference may be to hear it. Our preference may be
Right.
to see a group of apples or whatever it is.
Right.
And I feel like someone else mentioned in the comments too, when you're in a classroom, the likelihood is you're using like multisensory tools in order
Mhm.
to accommodate so many different types of learning styles.
Right.
For me, I feel like there's a middle place with so many things, and there's that
Right.
balance. And I personally believe that people do learn differently, but that doesn't mean it has to be that way every time. But
Right.
you know, if there's a child at school that has a test coming up, that maybe writing vocabulary words on flashcards are best. Maybe hearing a song about them, maybe just having someone quiz you back and forth might be better.
Mhm.
To me, that's all the learning styles,
Right.
and it might be different than what they're doing in the classroom than what they're doing
Right.
at home, but I feel like for parents, the more you understand how your child is learning and able to
Mhm.
retain information, the more you can kind of help them during their homework or during test taking. And again, it's not going to be
Mhm.
perfect all the time, but
Right.
um, I don't know. I found it interesting that there was a group that was like, this is not a real thing. So
Right.
just
Right.
what are your thoughts on that?
You know, I have so many thoughts on that. I I I can understand if a person who thinks very logically
Yeah.
wants like a way to say, okay, this has can't why can't you test this? Why can't
Mhm.
you? Because that's not what this is.
Yeah.
Yes, I know that our general functions of our brain are scientifically, the same,
Yeah.
but you can't tell me that you don't see how there are people who have different preferences in the world.
Hmm.
I mean, I think you can just probably look in your own household and
Yeah.
see that.
Oh, yeah.
Like I mentioned earlier that I went to see Hamilton
Hmm.
with my girls on Saturday. Lewis would rather pound his hand with a mallet for the whole afternoon than for him to go into a musical theater
Yeah.
and listen to people sing.
Yeah.
Um, and so, that's a preference. I mean,
Yeah.
he doesn't love musical theater. I love musical theater.
Yeah.
So obviously, there's something very different about our preferences. There's
Hmm.
something just different in general about our
Yeah.
personalities and the way that we think and the way that we process and what we enjoy.
Yeah.
And so, do I believe? And I hope I said that at the beginning. clear enough where I don't believe that we just have one way of learning. Like,
Yeah.
I am not only a visual learner. We've already
Right.
talked about lots of different ways that I've learned,
Yeah.
but I know myself well enough to know that I enjoy and do better with visual learning than with any of the others.
Hmm.
And you might have two or three favorite ways
Yeah.
that you learn. So I think it's when people try to take it very literally
Yeah.
and they're saying, this, because even Howard Gardner was not saying that. He
Yeah.
was very much saying that that we have multiple ways. It was called multiple intelligences and
Yeah.
multiple ways that we learn, multiple ways that we process.
Hmm.
And so he was saying that, anything worth learning can be taught in different ways. That was his main point. So that has been the argument for that over the years a lot.
Hmm.
Also, if I just am very blunt and will probably insult a lot of educators when I say this, is that sometimes we just want to do the easiest thing.
Hmm.
And the easiest thing is to lecture.
Yeah.
The
Right.
easiest thing is for you to stand up in front of a group of people, tell them what they need to know, tell them to memorize it and learn it, and then have them write it down on paper with a
Yeah.
test.
Hmm.
Just because that's the easiest thing to do doesn't mean it's the best
Right.
way to teach.
Yeah.
And I never expected my teachers, it's not possible for you to be able to prepare a lesson with every single learning style to teach one thing.
Right.
The idea is that if you have a multiple set of ways that you teach things in a
Hmm.
classroom over time,
Yeah.
it engages kids' minds, it excites them about learning, it gets them connected to the material better. And so it's not an exact science.
Yeah.
It's just finding different and unique ways to make an active classroom as opposed to a passive classroom.
Yeah.
And it's hard.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that it's easy,
Yeah.
and it does take a lot of time. But it's well worth it because
Yeah.
your kids are going to gain so much more from an active, fun classroom than they are from just sitting and listening to you lecture or just sitting and reading in a book and writing down answers on a piece of paper. It's going to inspire them in unique ways. And so, I, but again, I think I said too, but we do have to teach them how to learn the other
Yeah.
way because
Hmm.
yes, eventually when they get to college, they're going to have to be able to sit in a classroom full of
Yeah.
300 people and take notes and take a test.
Yeah.
So, but that doesn't mean they have to do that every minute of the day
Right.
as we're teaching them as
Yes.
they're going along, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah. No, it totally makes sense. And I think, there's such like a power and a confidence in people knowing how they learn best and what their
Mhm.
preference might be. Because even if you are sitting through a lecture, when you go home, you can then maybe look at those notes and go, okay, hold on. Let me see if I can figure this out in my own
Mhm.
way, even as
Mhm.
as at a college level, let's say, if you
Right.
have that understanding from
Right.
a younger age.
Mhm.
And I think in for kids growing up, it takes time, but understanding how your brain is wired and understanding why you think the things you do or the decisions you make or how you learn is only going to help you as you get older. And
Right.
for teachers to understand that and make those connections, you have helped them build their confidence and you have helped them
Mhm.
build their understanding and maybe have changed their whole school experience. I mean,
Right.
for me growing up, I can see now where certain things were harder for me to learn, or maybe
Mhm.
I just would have learned it better had it been this way.
Right.
Or if if maybe I took tests differently or whatever it
Mhm.
was, but no one really understood anything at that
No.
point.
No, no.
Yeah. So, you know, being able to see some changes being made now in the schools from when I was younger, or just trying to help my own kids navigate their schooling is has been an interesting learning experience for me as well.
Yeah.
And it is nice to see that it's more I don't know if accepted is the right word, but it's kind of more understood that it's okay if you write something on a chalkboard, which they don't even have anymore because that's how old. Um, that
I
you
miss
might
chalk.
you might just need to learn it a different way. And and I see that with my kids. I see them feel
Mhm.
like they don't know something, and then I can ask it in this different way, and they get it. And I'm
Yes.
like,
Oh
right, so
yeah.
you do know it. It's
Right.
just you're
Yes.
not seeing it the same way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just feel like any understanding we can have of our brains and how they work is so
Mhm.
beneficial as time goes on.
Oh yeah. And it's just like you were saying before. Let's say that you are a college student and you are sitting there with a lecture.
Yeah.
If you know how you best process information,
Yeah,
then you can decide, do I just have my notes and I just read my notes and study them? Do I have a recorder and I record my notes and then I
exactly.
play it back to listen to them because auditory helps me understand better? So it'll help,
Yeah.
do I need to write them on flashcards because a visual cue will help me remember? Do I need to do some sort of a game in my head with a rhyme or with something? Because, so
Yeah.
you can take what you know and you can adjust what you need to help you to be able to process and learn. The thing that about this though with kids is that kids are not able to do that for themselves. They
Hmm.
they cannot process that for themselves. They're not realizing that they learn better
Right.
when they're sitting quietly. They just know that that's what they always want to do
Yeah.
because that's just their personality. It's just their
Yeah.
nature. It's just the way that their brain and their body's wired.
Yeah.
And not anyone, this is the other thing that people have a lot of problems with. They think, well, you're trying to tell me that one way is better than the other. No, that's the whole
Hmm.
point.
Yeah.
None of these learning styles are any better than any others. You might think so because you're going to think your learning style is the best way to
Right.
learn because
Yeah.
it's just like with Lewis and I and the keys.
Yeah.
It makes sense to me to think back to where I was. That
Right.
makes no logical sense to him. So
Yeah.
so it just, there's not one that's better than the other. It's just different ways that we communicate and different ways
Yeah.
that we understand. And so we have to be just as patient and understanding for other people's learning styles,
Yep.
as we hope that they are for our own. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
For sure. I agree. Okay, well, I have taken up a lot of your time. I feel like
This is good. You have no idea. I love this very much. This is what I do. I love to do this. So,
Well,
um,
and we
so,
already have other topics we want to talk about, so we will
oh,
be
yeah.
doing more episodes for
Oh,
sure.
yay. Oh, that's fun.
Um, can anyone follow you anywhere on socials? Anything you want to promote? Anywhere people can see you speak? Because you go to a lot of conferences and you are speaking sometimes.
I would love to say I'm consistent on social media like my husband is, and I'm not super consistent on social media. I am Val Davidson 827 at Instagram, and so I do put some things there. I am Val Pal Mickey on Instagram if you are interested in Disney content. I mentioned earlier, my friend Virginia and I have a podcast that's called Kid Men with Dr. Val and Dr. Virginia. And basically, if you serve in a religious organization, if you're in a ministry and you have volunteers that are teaching that have never taught before or maybe don't have an educational background, that's really who we're speaking to there are children's ministry leaders um, that need that sort of educational background to help them to be able to teach their kids better in a religious setting. So we have that, and I think that's probably where you'll see me the most,
And everywhere in between.
and everywhere in
Um,
between. At Disney, whenever possible.
of course.
So,
And at Disney together whenever possible.
yes, yes.
Well, thank you so much for being a guest, and I can't wait to do it again soon.
Oh, thank you so much for asking me. It was fun.
Thank you for listening to the Just My Mom Sense podcast. You can follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Just My Mom Sense, or visit justmymomsense.com for past vlogs and a few of my favorite things. Music produced by Matt Harvey.